15th of June 1944, Army Group Center Headquarters, Minsk Sector. Morning situation reports from forward divisions noted minimal Soviet activity along the Central Front. Reconnaissance aircraft logged fewer than 90 sorties daily, down from spring averages. German Oberquartiermeister records showed ammunition expenditure declining to peacetime training levels, a metric interpreted as confirmation of a quiet sector. Staff estimates placed the next major Soviet offensive in Ukraine, 200 kilometers south. Intercepted radio traffic, analyzed by Fremde Heere Ost Intelligence Section, appeared to support this conclusion. Aerial photographs held in the Bundesarchiv show dummy depots and false bridge construction near Kovel, precisely where German planners expected the blow to fall. By 22nd June, official maps still labelled the Belarusian front as stable. Within 72 hours, those maps would require complete redrawing. The records show that silence, when measured by the wrong instruments, becomes the most dangerous sound of all. The period between 1 and 15th June 1944 appears in German operational logs as unremarkable. Daily summaries from 4th Army, 9th Army, and 3rd Panzer Army noted routine patrol activity, occasional firefights, and steady resupply along established lines. Frontline positions stretched across 600 kilometers of forest, marsh, and river valley in Belarusia. General Feldmarschall Ernst Busch commanded Army Group Center from headquarters staff rooms where wall maps showed defensive lines anchored on cities. Vitebsk in the north, Orsha and Mogilev along the center, Bobruisk guarding the southern approach to Minsk. Weather logs recorded warm days and frequent rain. Roads remained passable. Logistics columns moved unchallenged along the Orsha highway, delivering fuel, ammunition, and replacement personnel. Strength reports from mid-June listed approximately 800,000 men, 900 tanks, and 10,000 artillery pieces dispersed across fortified sectors. Reserves positioned 200 kilometers south reflected staff confidence that the next Soviet offensive would strike toward Lvov, not Minsk. German intelligence summaries misallocated entire Soviet armies. Reports from Fremde Heere Ost placed General Rokossovsky's forces in Ukraine. Intercepted radio transmissions supported this assessment. Soviet signals discipline appeared lax in the south, with frequent communications and visible troop movements. Luftwaffe reconnaissance confirmed concentrations near Kovel. Analysts concluded the evidence was clear. It was not. The evidence was constructed. Soviet deception operations, maskirovka, had been in motion since early May. Central Archive records from TsAMO RF, FON 240, Opis 2778 document the scale. Over 2,000 dummy tanks, assembled from wood and canvas, positioned where German aircraft would photograph them. Radio operators transmitted false traffic on open frequencies. Engineers built bridges that led nowhere, stocked depots with empty crates, and parked disabled vehicles in staging areas visible from the air. The real build-up occurred at night, under strict radio silence, along rail lines that bypassed obvious junctions. Soviet railway records note 43,000 wagon loads delivered to the Belarusian front between 1 and 20 June. Train movements followed redundant routes, often reversing direction to confuse observers. Troops detrained in forests, marched under cover, and assembled in positions masked by terrain. Artillery moved forward in stages, concealed beneath camouflage netting that matched the surrounding landscape. General Antonov, chief of the General Staff Operations Directorate, coordinated logistical synchronization across 4 fronts. Marshal Zhukov, representing Stavka, oversaw final preparations. Their planning documents show meticulous attention to timing, concealment, and the exploitation of German assumptions. Where German intelligence expected aggression, Soviet planners offered false confirmation. Where caution might have prompted deeper reconnaissance, fuel shortages grounded Luftwaffe sorties. By mid-June, German reconnaissance flights had dropped to 90 per day, insufficient to detect large-scale repositioning. Soviet strength in Belorussia exceeded 1.2 million troops. Artillery density reached 2,000 guns per 10 kilometers of front in assault sectors. Tank armies moved into forward assembly areas undetected. Ammunition stockpiles accumulated in hidden depots. Fuel reserves filled underground storage. The Soviet war machine, invisible to German eyes, prepared to strike along the very front labelled quiet. On 17th June, German situation maps maintained their assessment. Staff officers noted reduced activity as a positive indicator. Defensive preparations continued at routine pace. Reserves remained committed to the south. No alarm reached forward units. The silence held. For 3 more days, German soldiers manned positions, rotated patrols, and wrote letters home describing a stable front. NCOs inspected trenches. Quartermasters distributed rations. Artillery crews cleaned guns. Company commanders reviewed defensive plans that assumed weeks of warning before any major engagement. In command posts, situation maps showed a front that appeared under control. At 0300 hours on 22nd June 1944, exactly 3 years after Operation Barbarossa began, the silence ended. Soviet preparatory fire opened simultaneously across the entire front. Artillery logbooks record 2,000 guns per 10 kilometers firing at maximum rate. Katyusha rocket launchers added saturation bombardment. The sound carried for kilometers, a rolling thunder that shook the earth and shattered the pre-dawn quiet. German 78th Sturm Division, commanded by Major General Traut, reported within 30 minutes. Observation posts obliterated, communication lines severed, forward positions under continuous fire. Signal Corps entries at OKH headquarters note 85% radio silence from forward battalions by 0700 hours. Units that managed to transmit described conditions beyond standard bombardment. Entire trench systems collapsed, bunkers buried, and communication wire shredded by fragmentation. Sergeant Ivan Belyaev, an artillery layer with the 3rd Belarusian Front, recorded in his diary, "The earth trembled as if every gun fired at once. We loaded, fired, loaded again. The barrels grew hot. Ammunition carriers ran without stopping. The horizon disappeared in smoke. Soviet aviation joined the assault. Flight logs document 11,000 sorties in the first 24 hours, double the Luftwaffe's total operational capacity in the theatre. Sturmovix attacked command posts, supply depots, and road junctions. Fighters swept remaining German reconnaissance aircraft from the sky." By evening, Luftwaffe daily reports noted air superiority lost across the entire sector. Infantry and armour moved forward under the barrage. Soviet operational doctrine emphasized rapid exploitation of breaches. Tank armies advanced in echelon, bypassing strongpoints and driving toward operational depth. Rifle divisions followed, encircling isolated German positions. The assault unfolded with coordination absent in earlier campaigns. Staff work, logistics, and combat execution reflected 3 years of harsh experience distilled into operational art. From Vitebsk to Mogilev, the front was no longer a line, but a landscape transformed. Cratered fields, burning villages, severed roads, and broken communication wire trailing through mud. German defenders where they survived the bombardment, faced overwhelming force applied with precision. The scale exceeded previous Soviet offensives. The planning showed in every detail. Artillery fire shifted according to schedule. Engineers bridged rivers on time. Supply columns followed assault units without congestion. Weather remained poor. Rain turned unpaved roads into mud. Despite this, Soviet momentum continued. Tanks advanced 2 to 3 kilometers per hour, slower than doctrine, but faster than German reinforcement could respond. By nightfall on 27 June, Soviet forces had penetrated German defences along multiple axes. Forward command posts lost contact with higher headquarters. Situation maps at Army Group Center showed gaps where divisions no longer reported. Lieutenant Gerhard Bremer, a platoon leader with the 206th Infantry Division near Vitebsk, wrote in his diary, "We heard the guns before dawn. By noon we had no orders. By evening we moved on our own, guided only by burning villages on the horizon. The first day established the pattern. Soviet forces advanced, German units retreated or were encircled, and the operational initiative passed irrevocably." Army Group Center, configured for static defense, proved unable to respond to simultaneous breakthrough across 600 kilometers. Reserves positioned in the wrong sector could not redeploy in time. Fuel shortages immobilized counterattack formations. Luftwaffe support, already outnumbered, could not contest Soviet air superiority. In Berlin, OKH staff reviewed initial reports with growing alarm. Loss estimates climbed throughout the day. Communication from forward units became sporadic. By midnight, the full scope remained unclear, but the trend was unmistakable. Army Group Center faced not a local attack, but a coordinated offensive aimed at destruction, not attrition. Soviet operational summaries, filed that night, noted objectives achieved ahead of schedule. Breakthrough sectors widened. Encirclement of Vitebsk began. Tank armies prepared for deep exploitation toward Minsk. Ammunition expenditure, though heavy, remained within planned limits. Casualty rates, while significant, fell below pessimistic projections. The offensive had begun as intended. From Vitebsk to Bobruisk, the sound of artillery continued through the night. German soldiers, where they could, dug deeper, repositioned, or began moving west. Soviet troops consolidated gains, brought forward supplies, and prepared for the next phase. The record shows that within 24 hours, the balance of forces in Belorussia had shifted decisively. The Silent Front had become the loudest sector of the entire Eastern Front. Vitebsk, defended by German Third Corps under General Friedrich Gollwitzer, held strategic importance as a rail junction and supply node. German defensive doctrine emphasized holding cities to anchor the front. Fortifications surrounded Vitebsk. Trenches, minefields, concrete bunkers, and interlocking fields of fire. 5 divisions garrisoned the sector, including the 206th Infantry Division and remnants of several security units. Soviet operational planning identified Vitebsk as a priority encirclement target. The 1st Baltic Front under General Bagramian and the 3rd Belarusian Front under General Chernyakhovsky converged from north and south. Assault began on 23 June with renewed artillery preparation, followed by coordinated infantry and armour attacks. German defenders resisted, but Soviet numerical superiority, 3-1 in infantry, 5-1 in armour, overwhelmed defensive positions. By 24 June, Soviet forces had bypassed Vitebsk on both flanks. Encirclement tightened. German situation reports noted supply lines cut and ammunition stocks declining. General Gollwitzer requested permission to withdraw. Army Group Center denied the request, ordering the garrison to hold in place. Adolf Hitler's directive forbade retreat from fortified cities, without explicit authorization. Golvitz's command remained trapped. Weather deteriorated. Rain turned the battlefield into mud. Movement slowed to 2 kilometers per hour. Despite conditions, Soviet forces completed the encirclement by evening on 25 June. The last radio transmission from Lethate Corps headquarters reached Army Group Center at 1100 hours. Encircled, ammunition critical, casualties, mounting. Request immediate relief or withdrawal authorization. No relief came, no authorization arrived. Private Willy Krentz, a rifleman with the 206th Infantry Division, wrote in his pocket diary found after the war, "The mud is deep, the horizon burns, we wait for orders that do not come. Some men pray, others stare at nothing. The Russians are close now, we hear their engines." Soviet assault resumed on 26 June. Artillery pounded remaining positions. Infantry advanced under cover of tank fire. German defenders, isolated in shrinking perimeters, fought with dwindling ammunition. By 27 June, organized resistance collapsed. Soviet forces entered Vitebsk from multiple directions. Survivors surrendered or attempted breakout through Soviet lines. Few succeeded. German casualty reports, compiled after the battle, list 20,000 missing and 12,000 dead from the Vitebsk encirclement. 5 divisions ceased to exist as combat formations. Soviet forces captured intact supply depots, artillery parks, and communication equipment. The northern anchor of Army Group Center had been removed in 5 days. The pattern established at Vitebsk repeated across the front. At Orsha, Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army severed the Smolensk-Minsk rail line on the 27th June. German Panzerjäger logs show only 27 operational Jagdpanzer, Pfeiffer tank destroyers, remaining by that date, insufficient to contest Soviet armor superiority. Soviet tanks advanced 30 kilometers in 48 hours, reaching operational depth faster than German reserves could respond. Captain Boris Polyakov, a tank company commander, recorded in his after-action report, "Engines ran hot, dust blinded us. Ammunition depleted faster than resupply could match. Still, we drove forward. Orders were clear: maintain momentum, bypass resistance, reach the operational objective." German fuel deliveries fell to 26% of requirement. Supply tables preserved in Bundesarchiv records show operational paralysis, measurable in dispatch delays, abandoned vehicles, and immobilized formations. Units ordered to counterattack reported inability to move. Defensive lines, once anchored on cities and river crossings, dissolved into isolated strongpoints surrounded by advancing Soviet forces. At Bobruisk, the 9th Army under General Hans Jordan faced encirclement by the Soviet 65th Army. Luftwaffe aerial photographs from Flugbildstelle Südost confirmed the city burning by 28 June. Soviet forces completed encirclement on 29 June. German loss summaries from Heeresarzt 9th Army list 33,000 casualties and 12,000 captured. General Jordan was relieved of command and replaced by General Schlemmer, who inherited a disintegrating front. Nurse Hilda Meyer, serving with a Red Cross unit in Bobruisk, wrote in a letter retrieved post-war, "We bandaged wounds in cellars as roofs fell around us. The wounded kept arriving, more than we could treat. Some we could only comfort. The sound of artillery never stopped. When the Russians entered, we raised white flags and hoped." For Soviet planners, Bobruisk confirmed that coordinated artillery preparation, air superiority, and rapid armored exploitation could erase static defense within 48 hours. Doctrine written after Stalingrad and Kursk now proved effective in practice. The operational tempo maintained pressure German forces could not match. The corridor to Minsk lay open, undefended and exposed. By early July, Soviet armoured columns completed a 60-kilometre encirclement of Minsk. Operational map number 419, preserved in TsAMO archives, shows the pocket clearly. 40,000 German troops surrounded, cut off from supply, and facing annihilation. Field Marshal Busch, having presided over the disaster, was dismissed on 28th of June and replaced by Field Marshal Walter Model. Model's reputation as a defensive specialist offered little comfort. He inherited a catastrophe already unfolding. German survivors moved at night, navigating by burning villages and avoiding roads now controlled by Soviet forces. Lieutenant Gerhard Bremer recorded, "We move without orders, without maps, without hope of relief. Officers make decisions based on instinct. Men follow because remaining alone means certain death. The forests offer no safety. Soviet patrols are everywhere." Soviet forces tightened the Minsk pocket systematically. Artillery shelled concentration areas. Aviation struck any movement. Infantry closed escape routes. Tank units repositioned to block breakout attempts. The encirclement, though rapid, followed deliberate operational design: fix the enemy, isolate, then destroy. German attempts to break out met coordinated resistance. Soviet rifle divisions held blocking positions, while armour counter-attacked penetration attempts. The few German units that breached Soviet lines found themselves pursued and unable to reorganize. Most surrendered within days. By 4th of July, organized resistance within the pocket ceased. Casualty reports document the scale. In 4 weeks of Operation Bagration, 17 German divisions were annihilated. Soviet summaries list over 300,000 German casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. Army Group Center, once the largest German formation on the Eastern Front, effectively ceased to exist as a cohesive command structure. Soviet tank losses reached 1,700 vehicles, significant but sustainable. Soviet logistics, learning from earlier campaigns, maintained ammunition and fuel flows sufficient to replace losses within 5 days. Repair brigades recovered damaged tanks from battlefields, rebuilt them in field workshops, and returned them to service. The industrial and organizational capacity behind Soviet operations now matched tactical execution. Corporal Alexei Rudenko, a rifleman in a guards division, wrote in his journal, "The roads smell of fuel, blood, and wet uniforms. We advance faster than our supplies. Sometimes we eat captured German. Rations. We rest when we can. The officers say we are winning. The evidence is everywhere. Destroyed vehicles, abandoned guns, prisoners marching east. Still, we are tired." Mopping up operations continued through mid-July. Soviet forces cleared isolated pockets, collected prisoners, and inventoried captured equipment. German POW counts exceeded 50,000. Weapons captured included 70,000 rifles, 2,000 artillery pieces, and hundreds of armoured vehicles. The material windfall supplemented Soviet logistics, though much of the captured equipment required reconditioning. Soviet ammunition expenditure during Bagration averaged 13,400 tons daily. Artillery, the dominant arm, consumed the majority. Post-operation logistics reports noted rail bottlenecks near Orsha, the first indication that success had strained supply capacity. Soviet planners, accustomed to operating at the edge of logistical possibility, recognized the warning signs. Future operations would need to account for lengthening supply lines and finite transportation capacity. As troop trains rolled west, carrying Soviet forces toward the pre-war Polish border, staff officers at Stavka already drafted orders for the next phase, the Vistula-Oder offensive. Victory in Belorussia opened the direct route to Germany. The question was no longer whether the Red Army could break German defences, but how quickly it could exploit success before logistical constraints imposed a pause. For Germany, Operation Bagration represented total operational defeat. Post-war German General Staff analysis, preserved in Kriegstagebuch Fragment 231, conceded complete strategic destruction, not tactical withdrawal. Army Group Center collapsed under coordinated assault applied simultaneously across the entire front. No reserves existed to stabilize the situation. The initiative passed irrevocably to the enemy. Field Marshal Model's attempts to reorganize survivors achieved limited success. Strength reports from 28th of July showed 382 operational tanks across the entire sector, down from 1,300 pre-Bagration. Infantry divisions existed in name only, often reduced to regimental strength. Defensive lines, marked on maps as continuous, consisted of ad hoc Kampfgruppen, holding key crossroads and river lines. The front remained provisional, reactive, and vulnerable. Oberleutnant Heinz Lang, reassigned to a reformed division, wrote simply, "New maps, no old friends. We defend because we have no choice, but no one speaks of victory anymore." Soviet rear echelon operations during Bagration demonstrate the maturity of Red Army logistics. Railway records from Moscow show unprecedented throughput. 1,600 trains per day moving supplies forward. Petroleum reserve data indicates 120,000 tons delivered to front depots in July alone. Rail engineer Tatiana Koroleva, working the Smolensk-Minsk line, recorded, "No sleep, only whistles and smoke. We repair track under artillery fire. Trains must move. Everything depends on trains." For Soviet planners, logistics equaled strategy. The destruction of Army Group Center was sustained not only by rifles and tanks, but by the unglamorous work of transportation, supply distribution, and maintenance. The Red Army had learned that operational success required more than tactical skill. It demanded industrial coordination, transportation efficiency, and the ability to maintain momentum over extended distances. Soviet forces continued westward. By mid-July, advance units reached Baranovichi and approached Brest, nearing the pre-war Polish border. The pursuit phase tested logistics more than combat capability. Supply lines stretched, fuel shortages forced periodic halts, maintenance demands increased as vehicles accumulated mileage over poor roads. Combat reports from the 2nd Guards, Tank Corps note 80 kilometers, advanced in 48 hours during the Baranovichi operation. Impressive by any standard, but achieved at cost. Fuel shortfalls are documented. 30% of vehicles stalled awaiting resupply. Driver Nikolai Ostrovsky recorded in his maintenance log. Refueled from knocked-out enemy trucks, mixed German and Soviet fuel in the same tank. Engine coughed but ran. We kept moving. Soviet field repair units worked continuously. Maintenance logs list 1,200 vehicles abandoned due to mechanical failure between Minsk and Brest. Crews cannibalized parts from disabled tanks to keep others running. Engineers improvised repairs with whatever materials were available. The tempo of operations exceeded peacetime maintenance standards, but operational necessity demanded accepting risk. German forces, where they retained coherence, attempted delaying actions. Success was limited. Soviet reconnaissance bypassed strongpoints. Artillery suppressed resistance. Infantry cleared obstacles, while armor continued forward. The pattern repeated: probe, suppress, bypass, advance. Defensive efforts slowed, but could not stop Soviet momentum. By late July, Soviet advance elements reached the Vistula River. Operational objectives for Bagration had been met and exceeded. The original plan called for liberation of Belorussia. Soviet forces now stood on the doorstep of Poland. Stavka ordered consolidation. Frontline units required rest, resupply, and reinforcement. The next phase would require fresh planning. Army Group Center survivors reorganized under Model's direction. Strength reports from 28th July reveal the damage. Divisions reduced to battalion strength, armor depleted, artillery parks shattered. Reserves transferred from Army Group North Ukraine stabilized the front but left other sectors vulnerable. The improvised defensive line stretched from the Baltic states to the Carpathian Mountains, a front too long for available forces, held together by expedience rather than strength. German soldiers adapted to new realities. Oberleutnant Heinz Lang, whose diary provides rare continuity through the campaign, wrote, "We hold villages for days, then withdraw at night. Orders arrive late or not at all. Company commanders make decisions that once required divisional approval. The maps show a line. The reality is fragments. Soviet forces paused. Ammunition stocks required replenishment. Fuel reserves needed rebuilding. Replacement personnel arrived from training depots. Tank units received new vehicles to replace losses. Artillery batteries refit and recalibrated guns. The operational pause, though imposed by logistics, allowed both sides to assess the campaign's results. Allied intelligence, monitoring the Eastern Front through ultra-decrypts and aerial reconnaissance, confirmed the scale of German losses. British decrypt HW5456 noted German casualties as beyond recovery. 381,000 men, 57 divisions destroyed or rendered combat ineffective. The assessment concluded that Army Group Center's collapse exceeded even the Stalingrad disaster in immediate operational impact. Sergeant John Meek, an RAF reconnaissance pilot flying over the former battlefield, recorded, "Only wreckage where once were roads. Burned vehicles line every route. Entire forests reduced to splinters. The scale is difficult to comprehend from altitude. We photograph systematically. But the pictures cannot convey the totality of destruction. For historians analyzing Operation Bagration decades later, the campaign demonstrated the maturation of Soviet operational art, coordination across 4 fronts, deception operations, logistics planning, and tactical execution reflected institutional learning accumulated through years of bitter combat. The Red Army of 1944 bore little resemblance to the force shattered in 1941. Doctrine, training, equipment, and leadership had evolved through survival, adaptation, and the harsh education of continuous warfare. The human cost remained severe. Soviet casualty figures for Bagration list 180,000 killed and wounded. Tank crew losses were proportionally higher due to the emphasis on rapid exploitation. Infantry divisions absorbed steady attrition throughout the advance. Medics, stretcher bearers, and field hospitals worked without pause. The victory, though decisive, was purchased with blood. German losses included not only combat casualties, but entire formations erased from the order of battle. Units that entered June 1944 with full strength disappeared by July. Soldiers captured during Bagration filled POW camps across the Soviet Union. Many would not return for years, if ever. Families in Germany received notification of missing loved ones, a bureaucratic acknowledgement that provided neither comfort nor closure. The road to Berlin had opened not from the west, as pre-war planning anticipated, but from the east, through the marshes and forests of Belarusia. Bagration demonstrated that Germany could no longer defend multiple fronts. Simultaneously, resources, manpower, and strategic depth had been exhausted. The Wehrmacht, once capable of offensive operations across a continent, now fought to delay inevitable defeat. The archives closed the chapter with statistics. 2.3 million Soviet troops coordinated across 1,000 kilometers, 59 days of continuous operations, 300,000 German casualties, and a front-line advance 600 kilometers westward. The numbers, preserved in operational summaries and staff reports, define the campaign's scope. But behind every figure stand individuals, soldiers who fought, civilians who endured, and families who mourned. The records document decisions and outcomes. The memories carry the weight. August 1944, Allied intelligence services compiled comprehensive assessments of Operation Bagration. British decrypt HW 5456, analysing German communications intercepts, confirmed losses exceeding 380,000 men and the destruction of 57 divisions. The report concluded that Army Group Center's collapse represented strategic defeat beyond recovery. American intelligence officers, cross-referencing ultramaterial with aerial reconnaissance and prisoner interrogations, reached similar conclusions. The Soviet offensive had achieved in 2 months what the Western Allies, despite superiority in equipment and air power, had not yet accomplished in France: the complete destruction of a German army group. Soviet archives, partially released in the 1960s, provided additional perspective. Planning documents revealed the operation's full coordination scope. 4 fronts operating under unified command, logistics synchronized across 1,000 kilometers, and deception efforts sustained for months. Marshal Zhukov's post-war memoir noted that Bagration succeeded because German intelligence saw what we wanted them to see, while our true preparations remained invisible. Post-war German military analysis, preserved in fragmented staff studies, acknowledged the totality of defeat. Kriegstagebuch fragment 231 stated, Operation Bagration demonstrated not tactical superiority, but operational and strategic dominance. Soviet forces applied overwhelming force at decisive points while maintaining coordination across the entire theater. German defensive doctrine, predicated on static defense of key positions, proved inadequate against mobile operations conducted at operational depth. The campaign's human dimension persisted in survivor accounts. Corporal Dieter Vogel, captured near Minsk and held in Soviet captivity until 1949, wrote decades later, "We walked east until no sound of engines remained, only footsteps and the quiet of men who had nothing left to say. Some died on the march, others disappeared into camps. I remember exhaustion more than fear and silence more than hatred. The war continued, but for us, it had ended." Soviet veterans carried different memories. Sergeant Ivan Belyaev, the artillery layer whose diary recorded the opening bombardment, survived the war and returned to his village in Ukraine. His post-war writings describe pride in victory tempered by loss. "We liberated our homeland. We drove the invaders back. But the cost, the friends who did not return, the villages that no longer existed, the years stolen from our youth, remains with those who lived through it." Operation Bagration reshaped the Eastern Front permanently. German defensive lines, once anchored on prepared positions and fortified cities, became fluid and reactive. Soviet forces maintained initiative until war's end. The operational methods refined during Bagration, coordinated multi-front offensives, deep operations, and systematic encirclement, characterized subsequent campaigns: Vistula Oder, East Prussia, and Berlin. For the Soviet Union, Bagration represented vindication of doctrine developed through suffering. The Red Army of 1944 bore the imprint of survival, units rebuilt after catastrophic losses, commanders promoted through merit rather than ideology, and tactics learned through trial and costly error. The victory was not inevitable, but earned through adaptation, industrial mobilization, and the determination of soldiers who fought not for ideology alone, but for survival and the liberation of occupied homeland. Germany's strategic position after Bagration became untenable, fighting on three fronts, east, west, and south, with depleted reserves, shortened supply lines, and eroding industrial capacity. The Wehrmacht could delay, but not prevent defeat. The collapse of Army Group Center accelerated the war's conclusion by removing any possibility of stabilizing the Eastern Front. Civilian populations bore the war's heaviest burden. Belarusian villages, caught between retreating German forces and advancing Soviet armies, suffered devastation. Exact civilian casualty figures remain uncertain, but post-war Soviet surveys documented widespread destruction. Entire towns razed, populations displaced, and infrastructure obliterated. The war's passage through Belarusia left scars that persisted for generations. The Minsk offensive, a key component of Bagration, resulted in the liberation of the Belarusian capital on 3rd July 1944. Soviet forces entered a city that had endured 3 years of occupation. Of the pre-war population of 300,000, fewer than 70,000 remained. The city's physical destruction was near total. Administrative buildings demolished, factories dismantled, residential areas burned. Liberation brought freedom but not immediate relief. Reconstruction would require years. Railway logistics, the unglamorous foundation of Soviet success, continued to function throughout the campaign and beyond. Engineer Tatiana Koroleva, whose brief quote appears in earlier records, survived the war and worked Soviet railways until retirement. Her service record, preserved in transportation archives, notes continuous duty from 1942 through 1945 without extended leave. A pattern common among rear echelon personnel whose labour sustained frontline operations. Operation Bagration remains one of the most complete operational destructions in modern warfare. 2.3 million Soviet troops, coordinated across 4 fronts, advanced 600 kilometers in 59 days, destroying 28 German divisions outright and crippling 29 others. The campaign demonstrated that industrial capacity, operational coordination, and adaptive doctrine could overcome defensive advantages when applied with systematic precision. The records close without commentary. Archival documents present facts. Units engaged, casualties inflicted, distances advanced, supplies consumed. Behind those facts stand individuals whose lives intersected with history at its most violent. Some survived to bear witness, others left only names in casualty lists or letters that never reached home. The files preserve what can be measured, memory preserves what cannot. In the ledger's final line, the balance had turned. The outcome followed.